Hi everyone, I'm Kevin J. Kennedy and this is a horror show, and this evening I have Nick Roberts with me. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Brilliant, thanks. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my
Pleasure to
pleasure.
have you. So, Nick, I'm going to talk to you first of all about what I think is your second book, The Exorcist House. Is that right? Was that your second novel
That was my
release?
second. Yeah, that's the one that sort of took off, and what everyone sort of came to know me from was that book. Yeah, that was the second one.
Yeah, so I think your first was Anathema. Am I saying that right?
Anathema.
Anathema. Okay.
Yeah,
So the reason I'm going to speak to you about Exorcist House first, because as you say, it exploded and it went absolutely mental. The last time I had a look, I think it had over 10,000 ratings in Goodreads,
yeah.
which for anybody that doesn't write or doesn't publish or anything like that is absolutely insane for a book outside of the mass market. So for again, most people have probably read it, but do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Nick?
Yeah, so the Exorcist House is about a family that is the United States. They live in southern Ohio, and they want the patriarch, Daniel, he's a psychologist, and he has this bright idea of flipping this house for profit that's in southern West Virginia. And there's actually and it takes place in the 90s. And there is some truth in that, because in that part of the state at the time, in real life, there was a big industrial kind of boom in the area. So there was a lot of property value and a lot of open area that kind of skyrocketed. So that's what gave me the idea. So Daniel has the idea to flip this house. It's a sold farmhouse. It's got many acres of land, and his reluctant wife and his teenage daughter come along with him. And once they get to the house, they discover that it used to belong to an exorcist, and that the exorcist actually died in the house and maybe brought some of his work home with him. And all hell sort of breaks loose from there.
Yeah. And so I suppose one of the first questions I want to ask was, about that book in particular is what attracted you to doing an Exorcist story?
So the possession subgenre out of any movie or book is the one that scares me the most. And I have to attribute it to seeing The Exorcist, the movie, when I was way too young. I was at a friend's house. Someone rented it from Blockbuster Video, and we watched the VHS of it, the uncut version where she crawls down the stairs backwards. And I just remember never feeling a level of terror in that way from something that wasn't real. And that
Yeah.
movie, the way that movie was shot and filmed, it felt real. It felt like you were watching a documentary, and that just terrified me. So I always wanted to play around in that genre if I felt like I had something to offer to it. And I respect it so much, and the haunted house trope. Like, I love Amityville. I love the even though I'm a skeptic and I don't buy into the stories of Ed and Lorraine Warren and all of their paranormal investigations, I still love reading about them. So
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by the idea of haunted houses and demonology and things like that. So that's what drew me into wanting to write The Exorcist House.
Yeah. Think I'd probably agree there. I've been reading horror for a long time, and I've read fairly extreme horror, and I think that you get a bit desensitized over the years, whether it's watching or whether it's reading, and most tropes have been done to by different people, and but I think like ghosts and paranormal things and The Exorcist, even when you don't believe, I'm an unbeliever. I don't believe in it either.
Right.
But still, shit sends a kind of shiver up your spine. But if you're watching some of the movies and they're well done, it still creeps you out, even though there's that element of doubt. The paranormal activity movies and things like that as well.
Oh
Where, when the first one came out, was it wasn't exactly full of action all the way through it, but when things happened, You know,
Yeah.
you kind of you set up. So
I think that's because, for me at least, as opposed to being scared from like Jason or Freddy or Michael Myers, those are all external forces. And I'm a very internal person, and like I have a very loud voice in my head, and sometimes it can get very negative. So the fact that the threat, the demonic entity, can come from inside you, that I think has a strong resonance with why it creeps me out, like losing control of myself and from the inside out. You know, I can always try and outrun something, but if it's inside me and I can't get away from it,
yeah,
that's what's truly sinister about that.
yeah. And I read The Exorcist House. You know, I think some books come along and everybody's reading them, and you know, you think, well, I need to read it now. And historically, when books have come out and everybody's kind of jumped in the bandwagon and says it's brilliant, you must read it. Often, I haven't loved the book, but I did love The Exorcist House. It was fantastic. It was really well written.
Thank you.
I loved the characters in it. And recently, I think recently, you've released a sequel.
Yes. Well, I finished it. It actually comes out officially on September 13th.
Plus, it's a
I
pre-order that's up at the moment.
pre-order for Kindle is up. I believe there's pre-orders for Barnes and Noble, but the for physical copies, but there is not, as of this date, there is not a physical copy that it's up for pre-order. Now on the 13th, everything will be up for grabs. But I actually just sent out. I stayed up late the last 2 nights packaging books, pre-orders of paperbacks and hardbacks for people that were on my Patreon, people that bought the pre-orders when I put the link up from my personal website. And so all of those people in the next day or two are going to be receiving the book almost 2 weeks before its official release. So I'm hoping to start seeing some of those posts pop up on social media, because I don't know if those people know that the book's in the mail yet.
All right, okay. We'll probably it would be good to talk a little bit about your Patreon and what you offer. I don't know if you get tiers and things. So
I totally killed my Patreon 2 days ago.
you're not doing it.
I'm not doing it. See, I made kind of a post to my Patreon people, letting them know that I'm with the start of the new school year. You know, I'm a teacher by day, and I'm a full time writer by night, and I also have a wife and 3 young kids. So I have a lot going on during the school year, and I kind of started Patreon last summer, and man, it just took a toll on me through the school year. And as I made it through this summer with Patreon, I did get a lot of awesome author interviews. I wrote a novella and a bunch of short stories for it, made a ton of friends and fans. But it's a lot of work. Like I put a lot of work into it, and it would take away a lot of the time that I had to put into my novels.
Yeah,
And whenever I sign contracts with publishers and I have due dates, but yet I also kind of have due dates to these Patreon subscribers because they're
yeah,
paying for a monthly thing. And yeah, so with being a teacher right now, I had to shut it down. I sent them a message letting them know that I'm creating a free Facebook group for anyone on Patreon to come and join. In that group, I'll still upload, like if they want to pre-order a book, I'll post that link in that group first. They'll still get exclusive access and all that stuff, but it's the only difference is that it's free and it's on Facebook, and
yeah.
it kind of frees me up from having to write monthly short stories and do these
Yeah.
author interviews.
It removes a bit of the pressure. I understand. I've never used it. I've heard a lot of people speak really positively about it, but I think what you've just said is the exact reason that I don't start it up. Obviously, I don't write anywhere near as much as yourself, but I spend a lot of time putting anthologies together, and it is time consuming. I work full time as well. I spend a lot of time with my wife. We were talking before we come on, mentioned I've got 3 cats, a dog, and just everything else. I my mother looks after my auntie who's disabled and things, so spend a bit of time taking them out shopping and doing stuff with them. And there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And if you've got people that are paying for something, the pressure's there to provide consistently, whether it's weekly, monthly, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it would add a stress for me that, that I don't necessarily need. So I can understand you shut that down. I'd like to circle back to the sequel to The Exorcist House, though. So I read the synopsis, and through what I gather, it's sort of jumping back and forward. Is it between the 60s and the 90s? Is that
Yes.
what?
Yes.
So what can you tell us without spoilers?
So I had no intention of writing a sequel to the first book. Now, when it blew up and it became a bestseller for Crystal Lake, you know, Joe at Crystal Lake basically said, if you ever want to dive in back into this world, let me know, and we're interested. And I said, I've kind of feel like I told the story I wanted to tell. If I wrote a sequel, it would just feel like The Conjuring 2, and I just don't want to do that right now. So I ended up writing Mean Spirited, which is a completely different universe than The Exorcist House. And then as I was finishing Mean Spirited, I had an idea. I said, like, what are the best sequels that are out there, movies or books? And immediately, The Godfather Part 2 popped in my mind as an example of how to do a sequel correctly, because it did that cut in time where it showed the rise of young Don Corleone, the Godfather, back in, the previous to the first movie. It showed his rise, while parallel showing the rise of his son Michael ascending or descending, rather, into the role of the new Godfather. And it wasn't arbitrary. Like, each flashback reflected something that was happening in the present, and it was just so brilliant the way that story was told. So I said, half of the readers that like The Exorcist House wanted a sequel about Merle, the exorcist who dies at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's not a spoiler. It happens
Yeah.
in the prologue of the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, so half the people, because there's an element in that book of the family finding like his journals and all these different cases that he explored throughout his life. Some readers wanted more of that. They wanted a prequel where it's Merle, this backwoods exorcist, out exploring these kind of like Ed and Lorraine Warren, like demonology things. But then you had another group of people who wanted a sequel that was the Hill family. And, if you haven't read The Exorcist House, I'm not going to give away the ending, but they want to know what happened to the Hill family after the events that transpired in the first book. So I thought with the Godfather 2 format, I could give them the best of both worlds without overstaying my welcome in each world, because I didn't feel like there was a worthy enough book in either timeline to be a full novel. But together and intentionally complementing one another on scenes and flashbacks, I thought it would be really ambitious, and it scared the shit out of me at first to even think to write this, because I don't plot my books. I knew I'd be going about it completely blind, and I would somehow have to make it all connect the dots. Keep in mind, it also had to make sense with what happens in The Exorcist House. So, like, if I'm writing something in a flashback, I can't have it contradict what happened in the first book that I wrote. So it was ambitious on my end, but and it stressed me out. I made an exaggerated post on Facebook that this is the book that almost killed me. It almost broke me, because it was just at times just very stressful and hectic.
Yeah.
But it's been the most rewarding experience, and the people who've read the arc for it, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm so relieved by that. And I'm sure once it comes out and everyone reads it, it's not everyone's going to love it, but I'm just glad that I was able to put something out there that people are appreciating right now.
Good. I'm looking forward to reading it. I don't know if you can mention it. I'm guessing the answer is no, but do we get any small parts from? Was it Luke and is it Amelia? Am I mixing the names up?
You said Luke and Amelia.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't answer that.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it anyway. We'll see when we get it. So, what date did you see it releases? When will it hit people's Kindles and the book arrive? Apart from your early sort of people.
Friday the 13th of September. So we're not too far off.
Well, long too. Is that 2 weeks today?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks.
So, you like obviously exorcism, and as you've said, haunted house and that kind of stuff. I can see behind you, you're a big fan of Stephen King, but it looks of things.
Yeah, I've got about 4 bookcases. This is the Stephen King one. This is kind of the newer published mainstream publishers. Directly in front of me, where my laptop is sitting, is another bookcase, and it's all like Japanese and foreign and classic literature. And then I've got on the other side of the room, I've got these floating bookshelves that are nothing but books of horror books. So, like all of my friends that I've met in my writing endeavors. So
yeah. So to go to your sort of younger years, when you started reading horror, who were your go-to authors early on?
Well, I think as a kid, it started with Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That little trilogy of books, the illustrations, especially by Stephen Gamble, sort of terrified me. My brother would actually chase me around the room with the book open to certain illustrations, and the first actual adult horror that I was exposed to, I went to the library and I walked to the fiction section, and I was walking past the K section, and it was on the bottom shelf. And I remember seeing this what looked like or not a coloring book, but a comic book, like wedged in between all these novels. So naturally, I picked up this red comic book and I looked at it, and it was the version of Creepshow that they released after the movie Creepshow by Stephen King.
Yeah.
And it's, this one right here, actually. So I took that home, and it had cuss words, and it had violence, and it had adults doing things, and I was like, wow, this is scarier than like Goosebumps or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So then I think the first novel I read was The Long Walk by Stephen King or Richard Bachman. Stephen King writing as Richard Bachman, and that made such an impression on me that I just, Stephen King, like for me, like many others, was my gateway into mainstream horror. And I didn't really deviate that much throughout the years until I discovered Clive Barker and went down that rabbit hole. And, I'm still embarrassingly underread when it comes to horror authors. And, I've read the classics, and I've read in the last few years so many great indie authors. And it's really exposed me to how many authors there are out there other than like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and Clive Barker. I mean, there are so many great, amazing authors out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it all started with Stephen King, of course.
Yeah, I think I've spoken about that to a few other people that have been on. I've always been a big fan of the indie horror market. I read a lot of Richard Lehman when I was younger, and then I sort of mentioned I moved on to kind of leisure books were sort of, I'd say, mid-market, I think, and found like Ray Garton, Brian Keane, Edward Lee, and Jack Ketchum and guys like that. But after that, a lot of their books would come out through smaller publishers as well as, Cemetery Dancing places. And I would try other authors that those publishers were putting books out by, and I've been doing that, before Kindle existed. And then I was speaking to David Moody, the other day about when Kindle kind of came on the scene, and a lot of authors wouldn't touch it. but a few did, like Jeff Strand and obviously David Moody did. And it opened up a whole new world for a lot of authors, and a lot of guys that I was reading were able to probably release a little bit more than sort of waiting on publishers, maybe releasing their book next year. They could get it out a bit sooner and got into working on something else, and the volume of books came out, went up. I think, some people might think, that's a bad thing, but I think, as I'd said in another episode, that you need to kind of look at the reviews, look at what people are reading, look at the feedback, and some authors stand out, some books stand out, and you need to judge if it's a book for you. And you're not going to love everybody, obviously, but I think the indie market's amazing right now. It's went from strength to strength, and even if you look at the quality of the books that people are putting out, the covers, people are using amazing covers. As I say, I think it was David had said you used to talk about self-publishing. It was a bit embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen some self-published books back in the day that looked horrific, and you're thinking you could have done a better cover yourself with no artistic skills. But nowadays there's some amazing cover designers working with the indie market. There's great, they're not mass market. There's publishers like Crystal Lake that you mentioned, putting out amazing stuff. Are all of your books out through Crystal Lake, Nick, or just some of them? Or?
Just some of them. Originally, my first book, Anathema, was published by J. Ellington Ashton Press in 2020. And over the summer of 2020, they closed up shop because of COVID, and the rights reverted back to me. So I wanted this book to still be out there. So I formed an LLC and was able to publish it on my own. And I did some re-editing of it. It wasn't, at the time I was such a novice, and I'm still a novice, at some point, but I've learned a little bit over the last few years. But I thought I had hit like a traditional publisher, and it was kind of a micro publishing house. They did their best. They put together a really sweet cover, but when I got those books in the mail for the first time, the formatting was a little off looking back on it, and it was not professionally edited. So when I got the rights back, I put forth some work into the editing of that book. So technically that book is self-published now, the second edition at least. Crystal Lake published The Exorcist House, my short story collection, It Haunts the Mind, and other stories, and they published Mean Spirited. And of course, The Exorcist House Genesis, which will come out in 2 weeks. They're releasing that. The only other book that I've released is Dead End Tunnel. And that came about as a serialized, what I thought was going to be just a novella on my for Patreon. And it ended up, by industry standards, being technically a novel. And once that rough draft on Patreon was finished, I hired an editor. I got an amazing cover art from James Mabe, who did the brilliant cover art for it. I love that painting. And I had one of my friends at Sinister Smile Press format the book for me. And that's how it came about. So I'm kind of slowly learning and making connections on the self-publishing front. Because when Dead End Tunnel came out and I saw how much I was making not having to split royalties, self-publishing became a lot more appealing to me.
I think a lot of authors that, again, and I always go back to when I started reading loads of different authors, it was through Leisure at the time, who were a sort of part of Dorchester Publishing, I think it was, and they were putting out, I think, maybe two new horror books a month, and it was fantastic authors, great stories. And I lost my train of thought there. Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say about that. But I think, going back to what you were saying about self-publishing, there's a learning curve. Obviously, you put your first book out through the publisher, as you said, that you thought were a kind of traditional publisher, and then you've seen the bits you didn't like, and obviously you've improved in that. And I think it's the same for anybody. But that was what I was going to say about Leisure. A lot of those authors that were with them after they left, I think they took some of their books and put them into existing small presses. But I know authors like Brian Smith, for example, I think he was doing like one book through a small press, one book self-published, one book through a small press, and doing that. And I think the monetary advantages of doing stuff yourself, there's a cost. You pay a cover designer, you pay an editor, you maybe spend some money in advertising. There's costs that you wouldn't have if you give it to a publisher.
Right.
But obviously you get to keep more of what comes in. And I suppose the more time you're spending advertising the book, talking about it, promoting it, then there's more coming back to you. So I can understand why authors do that. But there's a technical side to it as well. You mentioned formatting. If I look at my early books, the formatting and some of them, at the time I thought I was doing it right.
Yeah.
I knew the basics of Word, and then you would look at an earlier book and you see with the text actually, for some reason, two of the stories aren't in the same font as the other stories, or it's added that space after a line which the other ones don't have. Just strange things happen in Word. And a bit like when you're editing, you know yourself, you read a story 10 times, you'll just miss stuff that you'll never ever see because you're reading it in your head and you think you've got it. And and I've spoke to people and they'll say, it was edited by two separate people and it went through 5 proofreaders and on and on and on. And then it comes out and the first thing you'll see is a mistake in it, and it's frustrating. It's sort of a necessary evil, when you're self-publishing, that something pops up the day after you've published the book. But fortunately, you can quickly go and change that and just re-upload the document, and it's not the end of the world.
Right.
I've seen people mention in reviews as well that, at the end of the day, I think it's more about the story. If there's errors all through it, it's going to pull you at the story. It's a problem. If there's one or two small things in the book, then, as I say, it is human error. But I think that more and more people will do it as time goes on and go down that. Or, if not the self-publishing route, there's a lot of small presses these days as well. One thing I've noticed since I've started this, I've been doing everything for about 8 years, and a lot of the authors that were about when I started don't write anymore. A lot of the publishers that were out, like JL International Press, are gone. And it seems to be a lot of people come on the scene, but they're about for 3 or 4 years, and then they just, writers seem to get fed up if they don't get the traction that they were hoping for, or if they don't make the money they expected to make. Some people quit. I've heard a lot of writers saying it affected their mental health, and they just weren't enjoying it anymore, which is sad because sometimes it's somebody who've read 4 or 5, 6 of their books and you really like their books. But I can understand the pressures. You know yourself, you're working as a teacher, as you said. Sorry, that's my cat shouting. You're working as a teacher, so you've got a full-time job, but you invest X amount of hours per day or per week to get your project across the line for the deadlines. How do you find managing your time? Are you getting a sort of routine now over the years, or is it still stressful?
Yeah, so the first book I had, it was after my first year teaching, and I had 3 months off over the summer, and I realized, I was like, wow, so this is like the big perk that everyone talks about with teaching. So I had this 3-month chunk of time, and I had my education in English, and I just saw your cat jump on the fish tank behind you.
It's doing its zoomies before bedtime.
But yeah, so I was sorry, I lost my train of thought about your cat.
You
What
were
was I
saying
saying?
you had the 3 months
Oh
break,
yeah,
obviously, for school.
so yeah, I had my 3 months off, and I just randomly like Googled how long the average horror novel was, and it said like approximately 90,000 words.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I can write 1,000 words a day over the summer and have a manuscript by the end of the summer. So that's what I did. That was my writing process for that first book, because I had to develop the discipline. I had never finished anything. I'd started 1,000 things, but I'd never finished anything. And by this point, I was like, if I'm not going to actually seriously do it, then it's just a pipe dream. So, like, I was kind of military esque about it, or militant. I sat down every day at 10 a.m. and I did not get up from that chair until I had at least 1,000 words. And it's easy to do that over the summer when I didn't have a job, and
Yep.
I had all this time. Now, during the school year when I'm writing, I'll get home before my wife, and I'll pick up the kids. I'll make dinner most nights, and I'll spend time with the family. And then once bath time's over with the kids, it's around 9:30 p.m. when I have some alone time. If I can get like an hour and a half, I can normally crank out at least 1,000 words and be good to function the next day, because I don't want to stay up all night and then burn out teaching the next day and then come home and be tired and try to write again. I have to be mentally there to produce good writing and to
Yeah.
function at my job. So if I can find that hour and a half window somewhere during the day, I'll just try to make the most of it.
It is hard, as I say. As I said, I don't write anywhere near as much as you, and I find it difficult to have that discipline when I'm trying to get something across the line. Obviously, the last thing I wrote any length was the novella Through, Crystal Lake Publishing, in their Dark Tide series. So
Mhm.
I think it ended up 20,000 words, which is, I think, the joint longest thing I've ever written. I wrote a novella called Halloween Land, which was 20,000 words. I've never wrote a novel. Almost everything I've ever written has been short stories. So it was a good opportunity. I was getting to work with Simon Clark and God Rollo, and I thought, well, I'll forever regret it if I don't get something done for this, and at least send it in and see what they think of it. So I had to be quite strict with myself, but it wasn't 1,000 words a day kind of thing. I just knew I had a deadline and when I had to push for and that. But I think, I'm the same as yourself. Go to work, I go up in the morning, I go to the gym, I come home, I go to work, and then I come in at night the same. I'll go and pick up some messages, make dinner, or my wife will make dinner. And then, maybe take the dog a walk or go out with my wife or walk with the dog. And then, feed the cats and things. And by the end of the day, I find you're quite tired, and that
Yeah.
the thought of an hour and a half at the end of the day, I found when I was writing, it was when I was getting up and I was getting ready to go to the gym and maybe sit and drink a pre-workout drink. I was trying to do a bit of writing then because I was fresh, I was just awake. It was a 4 shift in work. But the thought of having to write at the end of the day, I think I'd really struggle with that. I think
Yeah,
my,
it's
mind
taken
shutting down.
it's taken a while to get used to, because I'm exactly like you. Like, before I would write in the mornings, I would get up, I'd drink my pre-workout, I'd exercise, I'd come in, my brain would be firing, and I'd sit down and I'd just bang out the 1,000 words. But having to push it to the evening when I'm tired, physically and mentally drained, has been an adjustment. And
Yeah.
energy drinks are a friend. My noise canceling AirPods help out a lot, because I have a noisy household, and I, if the passion wasn't there, I don't think I would do it. I enjoy writing. If I don't write, I get very irritable. It's the
Yeah.
same way with exercising. If I don't exercise, I get very irritable, and I beat
Yeah.
myself up. And that's hard too, trying to balance my physical health with my mental health, because
Yeah.
if I write for 5 days straight and neglect any kind of physical activity, or neglect my family, then I start getting in a really dark spot. But I've written a lot, so that's a balance I'm still trying to work out, is finding time to, hey, it's okay not to write today. Focus on family, or it's okay to do family and exercise today and write tomorrow. Um,
Yeah.
I'm just very worried that if I get out of a routine, slowly not, I'll slowly back out of that routine, and it's my own issues.
No, I can fully appreciate it. I think, I started going to the gym in the mornings about 2 years ago. I used to go all the time up till I was about 30. I'm 43 now, and I probably had stopped around about 30, 31 and just done next to nothing exercise-wise. And I went back about 2 years ago. I think I was pushing nearly 17 stone. And basically, my father had passed away 4 years ago, and was quite depressed and things like that, and I was probably drinking too much at the time and eating a lot of crap, not cooking, and when I went back to the gym, it was for my mental health. It wasn't. I wanted to lose a bit of weight, but it was. I thought I want to feel good. I'd been on antidepressants. I thought I want to stop taking antidepressants. I'm going to come off them, but I need to replace it with something. I can't just sit about and I decided I googled it and I tried to come off them once or twice, sort of lowering it, and I googled it and it said you actually can just stop taking them. It's a myth that you can't, but for 2 weeks there's a risk that you might feel really, really depressed, but it'll come out your system that bit quicker. And I thought that's how I'm going to do it. So I went back to the gym, and as I say, that's 2 years in now, and you know what it's like after the first sort of 3-4 weeks. It's miserable. And I tried going after work, and I was too tired. And I couldn't get into a routine. I was going twice a week, and it wasn't doing anything. So I started going before work, and before I knew it, I was going 6 days a week. And I felt great because I'd got and looked forward to going to the gym. And at that point, I wasn't. I really wasn't looking forward to going to work. But now I got up and look forward to go to the gym. But I come out the gym, I come home and get showered, and I'm in a great mood, and I feel good. And it's that way you've kind of achieved something anyway. And then I go into work in a great mood now off the back of that. I then have a better day, which means I'm more productive because, as I said, I'd written mostly short stories, but at one point I was just sending stories out to loads of anthologies and then kind of started doing my own thing with them. But I put stories in most of my books or the odd anthology by other publishers I like. And then, as I say, when my father passed, I just stopped writing. So it was probably getting myself back on track. And I kind of really slowed down with it. I slowed down with everything and stopped some stuff. And as I started to feel better, I started putting the anthologies together more frequently. And that's when everything sort of started picking up again, maybe about sort of 2 years back. So it's been great for me. So I'm quite hard on myself the way you say here. So I need to do the gym, but there's always a sort of deadline for whether it's reading submissions that have been sent to get an anthology across the line for a certain point, or now that I'm starting to write more again, I've got plans to do certain things for certain times. And as I said there, there's only so many hours in the day, so you need to be quite strict. Right, I need to go to the gym in the morning, but I need to read 3 stories a night, and I need to write 100 or 200 or 300 words to that and things like that. So you need to be quite regimented. And I'm like you, I get a bit sort of agitated if I'm not. I'm my own sort of worst critic, and I'm really hard on myself. So if I'm not doing what I consider, and I think as well, I don't know if you feel this too, even though I do quite a bit and everything, and obviously you as I said, your novel was wildly successful, but the anthologies I published do pretty well, and but I still never ever feel that I'm doing enough. It doesn't matter if I go to number one in the charts and I sit there, for a month or two. It's never ever enough. It's never quite good enough, and I'm not somebody that sits in the success. I've read about you need to try and steep yourself in your achievements, and I'm kind of like, right, well, I've hit number one in the chart, but I've got stories to read for that other book I'm putting together, and I haven't written enough recently, and this and that and the other. So no matter what kind of success I have, or no matter how good something does, there's always 10 other things that I'm not that happy with. And that's like you're saying, living in your head. That's kind of how I sort of operate. But it keeps me busy. It's a good thing for pushing you. But it's difficult that way when you can never really kind of do enough.
Yeah, and I'm fully the same way. And I had that realization. It's like, well, if I achieve this, then this will make me happy. Well, I achieved that, and then now I just set the bar even further, and now I need to attain this thing. So, one, I think it's good because that's drive and it's self-motivating, but also, I've had to be comfortable with my own expectations and accept what I can't control. All I can do is put forth the effort and my best work, but if this doesn't happen the way I want it to happen, then it's not in that wasn't in the cards at the time, but it all comes back to whether I enjoy writing or not. And I would do it I've been writing since I was in first grade. I just have to get the thoughts that are in my head, the stories out. And if I wrote something that was just universally panned, I don't know. I mean, it might upset me for a minute, but I'm always going to be able to go to the next story. That's like the cool thing. I was talking with other authors who were worried about, I forget what it was, but they said, um, well, you don't want to release that. You don't want to post that. Somebody might take your idea. And the concept of an idea being taken, I was like, well, that's the beauty of being like a creative. There's always the next one. Like, I'm not worried about that.
And
And
you'll do it your way. You'll do it different for the other person if they stole your idea. They're not going to do it the way you would do it
right,
anyway.
right. So, yeah, I think we both have a little bit of workaholic in us, but I think, I know for me, physical exercise has contributed so much to my mental health, which has a trickle down effect on my relationships and my work ethic. So, I don't think people realize how stressful it is, um, what a burden it can be to have to sit there in front of a screen for a while and try to think of things to say and stories. And, uh, it's, it can, writing can be not just stressful mentally, but physically.
Yeah,
So getting up and moving around, and even if I'm on the treadmill doing something monotonous, that's when most of my like ideas will come to me because
yeah,
I'm not thinking about. There's nothing to do, so my brain's automatically trying to tell myself a story to entertain myself,
yeah,
and that's where a lot of my ideas have come from. Like treadmill, driving, being in the shower, doing these monotonous things. And then
yeah.
I'm like, oh, well, this is a cool idea.
I think it helps. I was talking as well to David Moody about sort of self doubt. And I think, if you write something and it does get panned, that people don't like it, you'll have self doubt because it didn't work out. It wasn't very good. People didn't like it. But if it's the opposite, when people absolutely love it, it's like, well, can I match that? Will the next thing be as good? Will they also like that? And there's a bit of sort of nerves about releasing something else. Will it be as good? Self doubt can be quite crippling, and I think that's why a lot of writers drop out as well. I think,
Yeah.
I've seen writers talk about it in the Books of Horror group and in other horror groups too. Um, it's difficult to just keep pushing forward because you always know when you finish it, you have to put it out into the world.
Yep.
And, regardless of how sort of easy woozy you are about feedback, sometimes it's going to hit. Sometimes somebody will say something and you think, oh, are they right? Does other people think that? Or some people being kind? And self doubt is quite and I think, as you say, when you're on a treadmill, I love the cross trainer. I'm on the cross trainer every morning. That was how I lost 3 stones. So I fell in love with the cross trainer. When I went, I was getting shin splints. So I had to
Oh,
stay
yeah.
off the treadmill for a wee bit. It was too heavy. And I love the cross trainer, but I'm the same. You get ideas, but I think you're in a good place when you're on there, and it frees up your mind to think about ideas, about stories and things. And as you say, it can be a little bit monotonous as well, just sort of on the spot.
Yeah.
But no, I definitely, as I say, it's definitely helped me. I wanted to ask you a wee bit, and I don't know if you want to talk about it or no, but you sent me a story, a vampire story for my vampire anthology.
Yeah.
And I think it was quite a personal story
Yeah.
for you. And I know you spoke when the book came out. I know you spoke a little bit about it online. Again, for people that maybe haven't been in the particular horror groups that we're in, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, yeah, you were kind enough to ask me if I had any ideas for a vampire anthology, and my immediate reaction was vampires are on the lower tier of my favorite subgenre. I can name maybe like 3 or 4 books that I love that are vampire related. Um, So initially I was like, well, I'm gonna take this as a challenge because if if I don't feel like there's not that great of a market there, then maybe put up or shut up. If you can't,
Yeah,
if so I challenged myself to come up with a vampire tale that would interest me and scare me because I'm my own audience when I'm writing. So I thought back immediately. I thought of like my favorite vampire tales, and two of them take place in snowy areas. And this phrase "devil in the snow" it came out of nowhere, and it kind of stuck with me. So I thought about like 30 Days of Night, the graphic novel and the movie, and I thought about Let the Right One In, and those two sort of informed my story. I wanted it to be very character driven and emotional, like Let the Right One In is. And I wanted it to be the vampires to be a visceral monster, foaming at the mouth type of unstoppable demonic force like 30 Days of Night. So those were my two influences that I sort of pulled from. But the personal story, the story "Devil in the Snow," it's about a young man who is dealing with addiction, and he's sent to stay with his older brother on an Air Force base in Alaska. Now, the true story behind that is that's exactly what happened to me. I was in my teens, I was not doing well, and my parents thought it would be beneficial for me to go spend some time literally in Alaska on an Air Force base with my brother and hoping that would cure the situation. When in reality, as soon as I got there, we started drinking. I found people that I could get stuff from. And, I didn't change what was going on up in my mind. I just had a geographical change.
yeah.
But yeah, so in that's the personal side of that story. And so like when I wrote it, I was like, that's the premise I want to have. I want to have this guy who's at this base in Alaska. And one thing that happened to me whenever I was in downtown Anchorage, Alaska, I walked by and I saw all these native vendors who were selling all these intricate things. And they were beautiful, exotic things that I'd never seen before, and I enjoyed listening to the stories behind all of them. So I factored that into my short story as well. And I was like, well, I want to take this and have incorporate that into this vampire tale, but it's also a tale about these two brothers. And my older brother, who was in the Air Force, he passed away year before last. And when I was writing this story, it was in the few months I think after he passed. I mean, it was relatively close. And I remember when I saw him for the first time in his uniform when I got off the plane in Anchorage and saw him, I was like, wow, like he looks like a superhero. For one, he was my older brother. Two, he was, in uniform. He was physically fit, the best he'd ever looked. And, that impression stayed with me. So I wanted to honor that version of my brother, to immortalize that with this story, but also
Yeah.
have it be scary as hell. And, that I'm very proud of that story. It's, I try to push that story and that collection on as many people as I can because
It's an amazing story, and the thing is and there may be people watch this and think, well, he has to say that he's published it, but anybody that's worked with me over the maybe 7 years that I've put the anthologies together, I'm quite harsh. There's a lot of rejections, and for anybody that doesn't know, my anthologies are invite only, so I'm actually inviting people. But if the story just isn't what I need it to be, it doesn't go in the book. Um, and there's been very few authors through the years that have had sort of hard feelings about that. But when I put the first book together, it was a case of, well, if I never sell a copy, I'll have a book that I really like, a book that I think's brilliant. And the only way to do that is to make sure that I love every story in the book. Um, And, you know, I don't expect everybody to have the same taste as me, but if, you know, my publishing company's me. I use an editor, I use a cover designer, but, you know, I send the invites out to authors that I've read, so I already know if I like their style of writing, which is important to me. You know, I already know if I've liked a novel or novellas or a few, which heightens the chance that I'm going to like the story they send me. It doesn't guarantee it. So I cut out a lot of the work because I've done open calls, and they're really, really lengthy processes. You get a lot of stories in. And personally, for me, I don't think the quality's there with a lot of them. So you find a few gems, and that's great. So the Christmas book that's up for pre-order, a few people pulled out, and I ended up I didn't get enough stories for the ones that I'd accepted. So I'd done an open call for a while, and I got 4 or 5 brilliant stories, but I got an awful lot of stories sent to me. And I didn't like most of them, and that's just maybe my personal taste. It's no criticism to the authors that I've rejected. And as I say, some of the people I'm rejecting are people that I've loved 4, 5, 6 of their novels and novellas, and I've invited them, but that particular story didn't work for me. Sometimes I've maybe accepted a story that's too similar as well, so I might like it. But if I've already accepted a story, then I can't have 2 that are dead similar in the same book. Who wants that? But it was a fantastic novella. As I say, I was really pleased that you sent it to me. As I say, and, you know, I hope a lot of people do read the Vampires Anthology and check it out. I don't know if you've read the full book, but there's some great stuff in there. I have to ask you, you mentioned that you only really like 3 or 4 vampire books, but then you named 2 of them. What are the other vampire books you really like?
Dracula and Salem's Lot.
Right. Brilliant. I've read Salem's Lot. I've read Dracula. I've seen the movie. What was the Steve Niles one called again? If the name escapes me.
I said Let the Right One In and 30 Days of Night.
30 Days of Night. I've seen the movie. I think is there a few graphic novels? I think I've read the first one, but I don't think I've read the rest. I do. I quite like vampire fiction. I think that there's been some. Tim Curran recently released a book of something the Blood Devils. I'm terrible with names, and that was really, really good. And it's like 3 interlinked novellas, and that was brilliant. And Brian Keane released one called With Teeth, which are kind of vicious vampires in the woods, which I really enjoyed. And I think I had read a lot years ago. They're not everybody's favourites, but I love the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice as well. I don't really like romantic things like, you know, but the Vampire Chronicles were amazing. The world she built, and they're steeped in history. They go back 6,000 years, and they're amazing. So, some of them weren't great, but, you know, I think she wrote 13 in the end. And I'd say the majority of them she wrote 10, and then years later she came back and wrote the last 3 before she passed away. And Lestat is one of my all-time favourite characters.
I do love Interview with the Vampire. I forgot about that one.
Interview with the Vampire was a good book, but then obviously when you come to the Vampire Lestat, they kind of flipped it in the head, and Lestat says, well, you've heard Louis' side of the story, this is my side of the story, and it goes back to when he's out sort of hunting with a sword on his horse and gets attacked with wolves, and it was brilliant. It was an epic. But I do enjoy vampire fiction. That's obviously why me and Gordon Simon wrote the vampire stories after the Vampire Anthology. So I might do more with vampires as well. I've quite enjoyed writing the vampire stories recently.
It's a popular genre. I mean, people love vampires. People love zombies. I mean,
comes and goes. I spoke to David Moody about that too. Obviously, I don't know if you've read David's work, but he's very much a zombie guy, and you know, and he's got a lot of zombie fiction out. So, and we were talking about that. You know, it comes and it goes as well. And I know Brian Keane had a big success with The Rise, and then City of the Dead, and he later wrote Dead Sea. I think he's just released another zombie book, Dead Island or something. I haven't read it. I think it's out.
I've seen it on Twitter, and I follow Brian. I don't know exactly if it's out or not yet, but I know that when I saw him post about it, and keep in mind I'm not a zombie guy, but I saw him post it, and I was like, okay, this is on my radar. I kind of want to have a read at this one.
I really enjoy Brian's work. He's wrote a lot of great books over the years. I've been following him. Well, I think I read The Rising, and at that point, I think he maybe had 3 or 4 books out, and I quickly read them all. And I think I've read most of what he's written now. I've got a few signed limited edition books and things like that. So he's a fantastic author.
Yeah, he's a great guy too. He's been nothing but nice and taken the time to answer any of my questions on Twitter, and meeting him at AuthorCon, and he did so much with Scares That Care, and helping whenever my infant son had his accident where he had boiling water fall on him. Brian was instrumental in getting fundraising for Jack through Scares That Care. So whenever I went to AuthorCon, we knew that Jack had been nominated as their. They give money to I think a cancer survivor, a child, and a burn victim, and they did not have a candidate for burn victim. And when Brian saw me post about Jack, he reached out to me, and so did Joe, who runs Scares That Care. And they were like, we want to help out. That's what we do. And I said, I don't want to take away from somebody else that might need this more than me. And they were like, what are your medical bills? And I was like, well, the first medical bill I got was $96,000. He said, sounds like you need it. So we showed up at Scares That Care, and I was a vendor at AuthorCon. That's why we went. We didn't go for the charity event, but we were in the opening ceremony, and they were talking about the charity and why we were all here. And then they presented me with a $10,000 check for Jack's medical bills. And we had no idea that was coming. And it was emotional. And that's the kind of guy that Brian is. He shows up and he gives so much back to this community in so many different ways.
A lot of amazing things. I can remember really early days, and again earlier days of the internet, when Brian had his message board, which was massive then, but that was before social media was what it is now, and everybody sort of migrated away from message boards, I think, onto social media. But Brian's, from memory, had the biggest message board that I can remember back then. And it was quite a social place for authors, readers, and everything. And I know he'd done a lot for veterans back then as well. And I forget the names of things. I know they were sending books, they was raising money. And I know Scares That Care's been going for a good number of years now, hasn't it? And helped quite a lot of people. I think the last time I probably spoke to Brian was probably through his message board, so it was a long time ago. Obviously, being in Scotland, I don't get to come to any of the American cons. I keep getting asked. Over the last sort of year, I've been asked a few times if I'd be interested in coming to conventions in America, but I've not even done any conventions in the UK yet, so I think maybe start here and then move on for there. So I keep saying when I've maybe I used to say when I've got enough books out, but I think I've published about 40 anthologies now, so there's probably enough to have a table.
You would make a killing at one of these conventions.
I need to go. I've been asked a few times. I'm going to go to one as a visitor this month. One of my friends messaged me and asked me if I would go to HorrorCon UK with them. So Matt Shaw is going. David Sodergren, who I had on the show. If you've not read David, he's a Scottish author as well. He's brilliant. I think James, and I'll probably pronounce this wrong, James Lefbure, I think his name is, and MJ Mars, I think, are going, and there's another author that I don't know. So I think there's only like 5 horror authors going. I think it's more to do with movies and people like that. But my friend asked me, so I'm going to go along. But I've met a few authors at a few conventions, but I've been there buying books and just sort of snooting about. I've never, as I say, ever thought about having a table yet. But as I say, it's probably in the cards for next year at least. I think it's time to start going along and see how it goes.
Yeah, the hardest thing about conventions, especially like my most recent one was Books and Brews in Chicago through Books of Horror, And the hardest part about it is, as a reader and a fan, is not getting up from your table and walking around and talking to all these authors who you
Yeah.
have talked to on social media and you love and respect. Some of them, most of them, you're meeting for the first time, even though you've talked to them for years
Yeah.
online. And you, that's the hardest part, is being tethered to your table. But it's also a good thing if you have a line of people there buying books from you. That's, you don't want to get up.
Yeah.
But it's so hard when I'm selling my books to people online, and three tables down is Josh Mallerman and Ronald Malfi and Jonathan Jans, and I just want to get up and go talk to those guys and pick their
Yeah.
brain. But they've got their own lines too, so that's the heartbreaking part as a fan and an
Well,
author.
I think most authors, if you're going to dedicate quite a lot of time to whether it's writing, editing, publishing, but cover designing and horror, whatever you're doing in the horror industry, you're probably a fanboy as well. You probably got there through your love of other people's work, because if you, it would, I can't imagine there's many people writing horror that don't love the horror industry, whether it's watching the movies or it's reading the books. But I think it would be difficult. I've spoke to a few authors that have done the UK cons as well, and I think they're not as big as the American conventions. I think some are hit and miss. And I spoke to authors that have went and said, I was there all day, 2 days, and I sold 5 books. And I think the time that you're going to spend to sit there. But you know what? I could take a laptop. I could be doing a bit of writing or editing or something. So I think next year, as I say, I'm going to, I'll try one or two and see how it goes. I'll get some advice for the authors here that have done some local ones. But as I said, I've been invited to Books and Brews as well. I heard that went really well. A few authors had asked me if I was considering going next year, but I'm thinking the cost of the flights, and I don't think you can get a direct flight. I think I need to go down to London, which is a flight from Scotland to London, and a flight to America, potentially a third flight to wherever it is. And I think that's a lot of flying. The longest I've ever done is about 4.5 hours on a plane.
Yeah.
So the thought of getting 3 flights and one of them's maybe 9 or 10 hours is quite daunting as well. But at the same time, I'm obviously involved in the market, and a lot of it's in America. 90% of my sales are in America, or 85% or something like that. Very small percentages in the UK, a smaller percentage in Canada. And then you get some hits in like Germany, Italy, France, things like that, other places in Europe. But America's where people are reading my books. So it would be nice at some point to get to meet some of those people, but we'll see what happens in the future.
I'm the same way. I would love to come over there and participate, because I'm seeing more and more authors from the UK and other countries just contribute, and thanks to social media, like we're able to globally connect, and
Yeah.
I'm discovering authors and voices and diverse perspectives that I would not have been exposed to otherwise. So I saw Christopher Triana did a signing in Germany, and that would be so cool to be able to see the world, to engage with fans, and but yeah, the logistics of it.
Rath James White, I think, done Germany before. I'm sure I've seen he. I think they like their extreme horror. I'm sure I've seen Rath come over there. I'm positive 2, 3, 4 years back. Time flies, but I think I seen something on his Facebook about he had come over and done a signing, and I think and I could be wrong, but I think Edward Lee might have some of his books translated into German as well.
Well, it's one thing for someone to say, "Hey, it'd be cool if you came to this event." It's another thing to say, "Hey, we're going to cover all your expenses. We're going to fly you out here. We're going to put you up. You don't have to spend a dime."
Yeah,
that's when it makes it a lot easier to travel.
Yeah, definitely. No, as I say, I think I'll try a few smaller ones here first, and then see how things pan out. But as I say, the main focus is to put more books out. As I say, I'm still enjoying a bit like yourself. You said you still enjoy writing. I still enjoy. For years, I've probably been saying I'll cut back in the anthologies so I can write a bit more. Or I was saying that before my father passed, and I kind of stopped. And then as I've got back into the swing of things, I'm saying it again. I'll cut back in the anthologies and write more. But I really enjoy putting the anthologies together, and you're talking about the diversity of the UK and America, and you've got Australia, Canada. There's authors everywhere.
Mm.
And I've got to work with authors for everywhere all over the planet and often put them together in a book, sometimes themed, but as you probably know, a lot of my books are unthemed. I like doing the horror collection series. Has got 20 books out now, and I think 16 of them are just unthemed. It's just, I come to authors I like and say, send me whatever you want to write. And I love doing that because it is, I prefer those books most of the time. Sometimes, like the vampires one I just said, I really I had read a few good vampire books recently, as I say, and I thought I'd love to get some authors that I like to write a vampire story for me. And that was brilliant, and I loved that, and I kept it a bit smaller because I think if you get 20 stories about vampires, that's when I'm not saying it gets repetitive, but sometimes by the end of the book, I just don't want to read another vampire story. So I
Yeah.
think the vampire books get 8 stories in it, which is not too bad. The werewolves one, I think, is the same, which was not the sequel, but the next book in the series. My cat's gone mental. But, the horror collection books, some of them have got like maybe 22 stories.
Yeah.
And it would be too much to read in a theme for me personally. Even the ones like this, there's a sci-fi and a monsters edition, they've got less stories in them, and it keeps it for going on too long. But I love being able to go to authors that I know have got very different styles. You might go to one guy and think, well, he's probably going to send me a zombie story. This guy will do a possession story. They might not send you that, but and they've got everybody's got different writing styles as well. So I think you can get a nice blend of styles in the book as well. Some people, write you fast-paced horror. Some people will write you more of a slow burn story. Or
Mm-hmm.
you get a few guys that write bizarro fiction. And I love that. I love piecing the books together and then deciding in the order that it goes, which I think is important. You'll have your table of contents as you accept the stories, but that's never the order I'm going to publish the book in. I like
Right.
to sort of control the flow of the book as well. So no, as I said to you earlier, with the sort of uprising in the indie market, there's as you'll know, for the Books of Horror group alone, but obviously other places, there's a wealth of great fiction coming out in the indie market now. And it was always my preference. I do like some mass market authors. You mentioned Ronald Malfi. I love Ronald's work, as I say. But I've read quite a few Christopher Triana books. I don't know if he's mass market. He's still more indie though, isn't he? I know he sells really well, but
Yeah.
he's still an indie author.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you as well. So you had sent me another story which I haven't read yet because it's for the next book that I'm putting together, and I was just finishing up reading submissions for the Christmas book, and then it was edited as it went. So I just had the last story to get edited, and then I had to pick the order and format it and everything like that. So I was busy with that. So your story's the first one I've been sent for book 21 of the horror collection. So it's the next story I'm going to read. And it's a co-written story, as you told me when you sent it. So how did you find, is that your first co-written story?
I actually co-wrote 3 stories at the same time because when I was doing my Patreon, I had an idea because I had never co-written anything. I had no desire to co-write anything. I didn't think that I had it in me to co-write because I'm such a control freak, and I felt like if I tried to co-write with someone, there would be throughout the story a distinct shift in voice. Like you would be able to tell when this person's writing or this person's writing. On the flip side of that, if I were to do it, I didn't want to be a control freak to people and be like, no, I'm writing this part or you need to change this. I didn't want to be that like authority type figure. I wanted it to be a complete partnership if I was ever going to do it. I didn't know if I could do it effectively or not. So I threw it out as an experiment for Patreon. And I said, if you want to do this tier on my Patreon, then what I can guarantee you is that, we will collaborate. You'll have an open line to me. We'll shoot ideas back and forth. We'll establish what our story outline is going to be, or where we think it's going to go. And then, you write a little bit, send it back over. We'll do it that way. And, I thought it was going to be such a terrifying process when I initially put it together. Once I asked these three individuals for their ideas, they were all different, and which excited me, and they were all really good. They each sent me like five different ideas, and I went with the ones that I naturally like gravitated toward. And the one that I sent to you is, we kind of just came up with that, um, and it's unlike anything I've ever written, and it's I think it's super fun, and it's at the same time you're having an adrenaline rush of fun because it is about whitewater rafting, but there is some just balls to the wall terror and horror that kind of comes out of left field. And I'm very proud of all three of the stories. And actually, the one of the stories is we're still kind of like tweaking a little bit, but you know, um, the two that are finished, um, I was very pleasantly surprised with how well the collaboration went and how smooth that process was. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't stress out over it because I was
Yeah,
still trying to write my novels,
yeah,
and I felt obligated as I should to these people because they're paying me for a service. And once we finish the story, they own the rights to that story. Like it's their story to do with what they want. So when I submitted that to you, I spoke with them first and I said,
yeah,
what do you want to do with this story? It's yours. I have connections, I can certainly try to help get it published. But if you want to keep it for your own anthology and, or your own collection, do whatever you want with it.
yeah.
Because, that's the perk that they got for what they paid. And the two finished stories wanted me to help get them published. And I mean, if it fits for your collection, great. If not, I'll find a home for it somewhere else. But I'm very proud of that story. And
I'm excited to read it. As I say, I'm looking forward to it. For anybody that doesn't know, I only sent out invites to this anthology like a week, 10 days ago, something like that. It wasn't maybe a fortnight at a push. So you were the first person to send me a story. I've got two in so far, and it's for book 21 of the horror collection. So that series it does pretty well, and it's still picking up pace even now. As I say, I'm still surprised as each book comes out. I always kind of think, will this be the last book? Will it be one too many? Because people have followed it. It's been successful. People do talk about it in groups. I see it, and it does well in the charts. I think at any given time, if you go to Amazon.com and you go to the horror anthology chart, I've normally got 10 books in the top 100, and they're mostly the horror collection. So that series is popular, but my worry is, well, it's book 21. I don't know how long that will continue to grow, or it might just keep going really, really well. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm sure that if the story fits, we'll get a lot of eyes on it anyway. As I say, it's a successful series. So it's always a good place to put something. As I say, the market's there for it. So hopefully, as I say, book 21 does well as well. Because I enjoy doing those books. I'd like to keep the series going for a few years to come at least. I talked about stopping at 10, then talked about stopping at 15, then I thought it's 20. Is that the but if people are enjoying the books, there's no real point in. I enjoy putting them together.
right.
A lot of authors seem to enjoy working with me. I got a lot of authors that will work with me continuously. There's a lot of the same names throughout the books, and then I discover a few new authors and I invite them along, and if I'm lucky enough, they come and work with me. I'm always trying to read new authors. So these days, my preference is novellas to novels mostly, but it's due to time constraints mostly with the working and the books and the gym and everything else. I can often read a novella in 2 days, whereas I'm lucky to finish a novel in a week because I don't get to read every day. Some days I'm sitting reading stories that people like yourself have sent me. So, but no, I'm looking forward to it. I'll get back to you fairly quickly. That's me tied pretty much everything up with the Christmas anthology. So I'm now on to reading for book 21. So as I said, you're the first story. So I'll get back to you in the next few days with that.
Well, one thing that you talked about as an anthology editor, and I talk with James Aquilone quite a bit as well, and he's a great mentor to me. and I respect the way he does his anthologies. And the way you said that, having stories that fit and that complement one another, like you might get a brilliant submission that just doesn't fit. And
Yeah.
for the first time, like I'm on the other end of that with this project that I'm not really allowed to talk about in detail yet, but we were assembling some authors, and there were only like a handful of authors that were up for consideration because of, not because there aren't hundreds of amazing authors that I know. It's that these are the ones that I want to tell this story, and these are the ones that I'd want to collaborate with in this genre.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think before the Exorcist House came out, before I had any kind of success or any kind of a following, I submitted a story to Classic Monsters Unleashed, which is James Aquilon's book that he edited, and it was nominated for a Stoker. And it was all about writing short stories based on like classic monsters that are in the public domain. So
Yeah.
like the classic Universal monsters and stuff. So
Yeah.
like I knew everyone was going to do like vampires or werewolves or Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein. So I was like, what is something unique that's going to make me, this unknown author, stand out? Because he published the list of authors he had already, like known authors he had already accepted their work, and he was leaving open maybe 2 or 3 slots for
Yeah.
unknown authors. And I took the, I don't know if you've seen the Vincent Price movie, The Tingler, but I took that and turned it into my own version and submitted it. And James, throughout the whole process, like he knew how badly I wanted to be in this collection. Throughout the whole process, he was updating me. He was like, "Hey, just wanted to let you know you made it past the first cut. Now you're in the second cut. Now you're in the final round." And then he sent me the heartbreaking email. He said, "Man, I'm sorry, but you made it to the final level, but it's just, here's what you could have done to make it better." And he helped me out a lot. And what I ended up doing was taking his feedback, making those changes to that story, and actually putting it in my own collection, which
Yeah.
James actually read, and he has a cover blurb on the front of the collection. So he actually blurbed a collection featuring a story he rejected
Yeah.
for his own collection. So yeah.
And it's interesting because I I tend to now work in the way where I accept or I decline. Whereas at the start, I was more likely to come back with some feedback for people. For the ones that I would now decline, there might have been things that at the start I would say, well, see if you change this, tweak that, maybe change, do this and that, and a few suggestions. And a few people didn't take it that well. Um, and whether that was just them personally or whether it was maybe because I was kind of newer in the scene and they're thinking, who's this guy telling me what to do with me? I don't know. And I thought, well, do you know what? Rather than ruffling feathers and getting into debates through emails with people, if the story doesn't fit, then I'll just decline it.
Mhm.
And that way they can go and do what they want with it. I had a few people when I would say, well, actually, I love your story. It's brilliant. This bit didn't really work, and I don't think that you tied something up. So that'll leave the reader wondering. And they say, somebody said to me, I don't change my work. And I thought, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
Cool. But I thought, is there, for me, and I've heard people saying they've worked with amazing editors and they've made their story better, and I completely get that. But for what I do now, as I say, it's extremely rare. I would go back to somebody and ask them to change. I'm glad that worked for you, as I say. I just don't do that now because it doesn't always go down well. You can obviously take the feedback, and I think it's probably helped that you really respect him and you love his work, and it's obviously made your story a bit stronger. But as I say,
Yeah.
I just had to avoid
Yeah.
that now.
He did it because I was the one just constantly messaging him throughout the
Yeah.
whole process. I mean, I probably pestered him to death, but so he probably did that as a favor to let me down gently, honestly. But I took his. I mean, he wasn't offering suggestions for me to fix, and he would take the story. He rejected it, but he explained why, and
Yeah,
just the fact that he did that, um, I think he knew how badly I wanted to be in that collection, so he was letting me off the hook easily. But yeah, I typically, if prior to that experience, I subbed to so many different publishers and anthologies, and it's always just a hey, thanks for subbing. This story's not for us. Publishing is a subjective experience. Blah blah blah. Don't take it personally. So his was the first I got, critical feedback on.
yeah. I think if somebody, occasionally people ask you, and you kind of test the waters with them, and sometimes I will give people a bit of feedback. But as I say, it's a risky business giving feedback to authors, and as I say, everybody's got their own personality, and some are a little bit temperamental.
Yeah.
But so what's next for you, Nick? Obviously, your next release is the sequel to the Exorcist House.
Yeah.
Have you got anything else finished or almost finished that we'll see after that? Or where are you at?
So right now I'm working on the sequel to my first book, Anathema, and it's called Anathema Legacy, and it's going to come out some point in 2025.
Did you just post the cover for that?
Yes, yes,
I'm sure I've seen something. That's right.
yeah, and yeah, I'm working on that, and then I'm going to be finished with that universe because Anathema, even though I own the rights to that IP, it shares a character with the Exorcist House, so it's kind of in that universe. And I have this odd relationship with Crystal Lake where I wrote Anathema first, but it has one of the character. The Exorcist House has one of the characters from Anathema, and it's kind of got kind of like a Stephen King esque universe, but it's difficult with rights and taking characters from stories that I don't technically own the rights to and using. So I said all that to say that the Anathema Legacy that I'm writing is the end of the Exorcist House universe and the Anathema universe. It's this 4-book kind of series that I'll be done with. And after that, I'm going to work on what is probably going to be my darkest book yet. And I have the title, I have the cover, I have the genesis of the story, and it's called My Corpse Has a Heartbeat. And it's going to be, I think it's going to test the waters. It's me testing the waters on whether or not my fan base, who expects certain things, will follow me into a different direction. And I've also, at this point, have enough short stories and a novella for another collection. So I just have to wait to get the rights back for a few of those stories before I can publish a collection because a couple of the stories have been previously published.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Brilliant. So plenty going on. Then have you got release dates for the? I said Anathy earlier. Anathema.
Yeah.
Have you got a release date for that one?
It'll be in the first half of 2025 because I'm going to self-publish that one, but so I haven't set myself a firm deadline, but I do have a contract for the audio rights with Tantor Media, so they're going to want their book at some point. So I have to finish writing that. So as early into 2025 as possible, I will try to get Anathema Legacy out there into the world. Partly because I'm so excited to start on the next book. I think that's how we all are. It's like we're always thinking about the next novel.
It's hard to stick to one thing, isn't it? I think it's like when I said I was saying, I wouldn't do any more anthologies. I'm going to write a bit, and then I start writing a story. But while I'm writing it, and or maybe downtime in the gym, and I'll think, oh, do you know what I could do? I could do this anthology, or as I say, and it's often if I've just done an unthemed one, then I'll maybe think I'll do a vampire book or something. And as I said, I'm doing the horror collection book 21 that you sent a story in for, and I'm also thinking, right, well, I've done vampires, I've done werewolves, the series I've called Classic Monsters. What do I do next? And every so often you get somebody messaging you saying, oh, you should do this. I've got the other series where the Christmas books coming out, so they're the seasonal books. So there'll be Christmas, Easter, Halloween, then it's been 3 other Christmas books. But somebody was messaging me about that earlier on the day and saying, are you going to do any other holidays? I'm like, but they're just, people have said St. Paddy's Day, it's not big enough. Valentine's Day, I don't think I'm the right person to put a Valentine's Day book together. It doesn't appeal to me. We don't have Thanksgiving in the UK. So I looked at all the other holidays. I loved the Easter book, putting it together. That was brilliant and it was quite successful. But I think one Easter book's probably enough for the horror industry. I don't think we need another horror Easter book. So, but I'm always like, oh, I could do this, I could do that. And it's always the next idea. And then you get quite excited. And it's hard to finish what you're doing before going and starting with something else. So, but it's great you've got loads of stuff in the pipeline. As I say, I'm really looking forward to reading the next Exorcist House. As I say, I'll get that. What date did you say that was? It was the 13th, you said?
Yep.
Friday the 13th?
Friday the 13th of September.
You've all heard it. 2 weeks, it'll hit your Kindle. Is that the same release date for the paperback if people are buying it online?
Yes, if they're getting it from Amazon, yeah, it's the same release date. If they're getting the signed copies from me, then they'll get it. If they've already ordered it, they'll get it sooner than the release date. I'm getting another batch in soon. I have to set aside some for a signing that I'm doing in September in Columbia, South Carolina. But after that, whatever's left over, I'll have to put on my site.
Just for anybody watching, it's maybe local. Where is your signing in?
It's called SC Horror. South Carolina's, it's their second year of doing this convention. And it's like you said, it's more than just an author convention. It's more like a horror in general. Like, so you have movie stars there, you have authors, you have craftsmen. So it's like it's a more of a big con event than just like an author con. So yeah, I'll be there, and it's I forget the dates. It's in September. Look it up. Just Google SC Horror. You'll find it.
There you go. You know where to go and see Nick if you're local.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on. I know you're a busy man. I appreciate it, and I hope we get to work together over the coming years.
Likewise.
Thank you. Cheers, mate. I'll just stop recording.